Good evening. Milton is one of the most geographically diverse communities in Canada, offering its citizens a wide range of rural and urban living and recreational choices set in the lee of the Niagara Escarpment, the watershed of the 16-Mile Creek, and at its most northwesterly boundary, a tributary of the Grand River. Complementing the beautiful view is a rich history that has been brought to life on the streets of this great community by the town of Milton, with the encouragement of Milton Historical Society and Heritage Milton. Local streets are named for citizens who have made a contribution towards the quality of life now enjoyed by all Miltonians, and arterial roads recall Canadians of significant provincial and national stature. Today, a walk, cycle, or drive through urban or rural Milton has become a lesson in local, provincial, and national history. Working through Heritage Milton and the Society, the late Jim Dills and I led the original effort to encourage the town of Milton to name future streets for Miltonians and other Ontarians and Canadians who have enriched our community, our province, and our country. We also worked with former town planning director Mel Iovio in the late 1990s to identify and name the neighborhoods and surveys before this latest growth period began, now of course in its 20th year. The earliest developers of Milton named some streets after family members. The tradition continued as each new wave of expansion followed, right up to the modern history of our community. In the early 1990s, longtime Society member the late Jesse Hamilton suggested local streets and their origins be listed and properly researched. Urban Milton was much smaller then, and the project quietly moved forward, incorporating many streets up to that time. In the mid-1990s, with development looming, Heritage Milton and the Society successfully encouraged the town of Milton to name its new streets for local citizens who had contributed to the well-being of the community, as well as those who had done the same provincially and nationally. They reasoned that doing so would forge a link between old and new Milton through the community's rich historical past. Both organizations were then tasked with creating a database of research names and replenishing it whenever it got low. Since 1999, the development community has been able to select from a long list of names for local streets, as well as collector and arterial roads. Local streets are being named for prominent local citizens and community builders, while collector and arterial roads are being named for former prime ministers, governors general, Ontario premiers, and Ontario lieutenant governors. At the beginning of the 21st century, the town of Milton sought to formally recognize plans of subdivision dating back to 1851 as neighborhoods, physically identifying them alongside street names on all street signage across the community. This initiative was the pièce de résistance of Destiny Milton, the multifaceted and unprecedented municipal planning initiative created in 1993 that made possible the current level of residential and commercial expansion in our community. Through the Destiny Milton exercise, the Council of the Day identified as one of its objectives a desire that steps be taken, wherever possible, to ensure that old and new Milton were somehow connected, both physically and otherwise. While architectural design and a trails master plan are examples of how old and new Milton came to be connected, the town turned to its rich history to provide a connection of another kind. The book, Milton Streets, which Jim and I co-authored in 2007, was developed to assist existing residents and newcomers to develop a sense of the contributions of the many people who prepared this place for them through Milton Streets. At its incorporation as a town in July 1857, Milton's town site included lots 13 and 14 in Concession 2. Carved from the former township of Trafalgar, the site was just 400 acres. The northern boundary was just north of Woodward Avenue, west of Ontario Street. The southern boundary was just below Barton and Sydney Streets, with Ontario and Bronte Streets forming the eastern and western boundaries respectively. These boundaries remained unchanged until 1953. Some 96 years after Milton's incorporation as a town. In 1953, a further 572 acres were added to the community. In 1958, unable to locate a high school site within these boundaries, the town annexed 10 acres just beyond its southern limits. In 1961, Milton's neighbors, Oakville and Trafalgar Township, amalgamated, and the years of resistance to any expansion of Milton's boundaries became soundly entrenched. Applications for annexations, a flurry of consultant reports, scheduled and delayed Ontario Municipal Board hearings, and the introduction of regional government studies frustrated all efforts to expand the town's boundaries. In 1965, the OMB granted Milton 214 acres, with 210 acres in the former Squeezing Township and 4.3 acres in Oakville. In 1967, Oakville indicated that it would agree to a 100-acre annexation, provided the area was examined by the planning boards, the two municipalities approved a joint water and sewer agreement, and a joint amalgamation committee was formed. Milton Council bitterly rejected that suggestion. In 1969, Milton was granted a majority of the land it sought. All of the land asked from Squeezing and Oakville, with the exception of a western quarter beyond the town's existing boundary, was approved. The decision more than doubled the acreage of the town at that time. Approximately 1,171 acres came from Oakville, and 359 acres came from a Squeezing. The western boundary remained unchanged, except to the south, where the railway became the boundary. The boundary on the south became Derry Road, with an expansion around the hospital. On the east, the boundary moved to what is now Thompson Road to Steeles Avenue, where it jogged further east to a point where Base Line met Highway 401. Highway 401, by the way, became the northern boundary. In 1974, with the introduction of regional government, Milton boundaries were extended to include all of the former township of Nassagaweya and parts of a Squeezing Township, and the townships of Oakville, Trafalgar, and Burlington Nelson. Milton grew to 366.6 square kilometers, becoming, in area, the largest municipality in the new regional municipality of Halton. While the community was developed over its first 142 years through a series of smaller plans of subdivision, the expanded community today is based on two very large plans of survey. The residential expansion underway from the year 2000 on the east side of the community is based on a development policy known as the Bristol Survey, formerly known as the Milton East-Southeast Plan. The expansion underway on the west side of the community is based on a planning document called the Sherwood Survey, formerly known as the Milton West-Southwest Plan. The Boyne Survey was added in 2004. So what is the history behind the names of the major surveys that now make up our community? The Boyne Survey is named for Boyne, a small hamlet on the north-south route that linked Milton to Brodie Harbor. At one time, it included a blacksmith, wagon shop, woolen mill, two churches, and a schoolhouse. A post office was located there in 1862, and stages traveling between Milton and the port or rail station at Brodie stopped at the Boyne. First settled in 1819, it is thought that Edward McClernand was the first resident there. John White, the MPP who was representing Halton in the Canadian Parliament at the time, people believe that the name that was chosen for the Boyne actually was chosen by him to reflect his Irish roots. The Boyne Survey today includes the Bowes, Cobbin, Ford, and Walker neighborhoods. The Bristol Survey is named for Richard Bristol, former Deputy Provincial Surveyor, who was licensed in 1817 as a surveyor. He was one of 4 licensed that year when pressure was growing on the Surveyor General to produce more surveyed lands in the post-War of 1812 period. Mr. Bristol did the original survey of the area where Hawthorne Village is located today. The Bristol Survey includes the Beatty, Clark, Coates, and Dempsey neighborhoods. The Sherwood Survey is named for Reuben Sherwood, who came to Upper Canada in 1784 with his Loyalist father, Thomas. He conducted township surveys as early as 1794. From 1809 to 1820, he was employed on government surveys subdividing townships, including the former townships of Nelson and Nassagaweya. Milton now has 2 major industrial parks, the 401 Business Park and the Derry Green Business Park. The Derry Green Business Park was named for Derry Road, the major arterial roadway on which most industrial development in that park will front. Green denotes the Irish section of the country settlement pattern in the area and was located actually just east of the park along Derry Road. There were 17 villages and hamlets that made up what is now the town of Milton. They all have interesting stories behind them, but two of the most interesting are Brookville and Omagh, which remain hamlets to this day. Brookville was named for Thomas Easterbrook and was settled in 1852 when Mr. Easterbrook built a general store there. That was followed over the next 40 years by buildings for a harness shop, tailor, veterinarian, cooper, hotel, and town hall. In 1900, fire destroyed 4 buildings, leaving the town hall and the general store. The hall was removed and reconstructed in 1987. The village of Omagh was settled by Irish immigrant John Beatty in 1819. A hotel and church were constructed there in the 1850s. By 1858, there were approximately 100 residents living in Omagh. And of course, there are several hundred streets today in Milton and counting, literally every week. I'm not going to share the histories of all of them, but here's a half dozen that may be of interest. Ramshaw Crescent was named in 2000 for Thomas Ramshaw, a local insurance and real estate agent who served as a member of Milton Council from 1918 to 1920, as well as Reeve in 1931 and 1934. Halton Avenue was named in 1953 for the county of Halton, which was named for Major William Halton, secretary to the Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada from 1806 to 1811. Victoria Street was named for Victoria, Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, from 1837 to 1901. Bell School Line was named for Absalom Bell, an early settler and farmer who, in 1855, donated a quarter acre for Bell School. He also donated a half acre for the Methodist Church, later known as the Mountain Union Sunday School. Commercial Street was named by Matthias Tietzel, who developed this area of the community and probably applied the name to suggest future anticipated commerce or business on that street. At one point, it was the site of the early post office, hotel, foundry, and steam mill. Dewar Court was named in 2000 for Duncan Dewar, a law clerk, conveyancer, and insurance agent who served as a member of Milton Council from 1873 to 1876, and also served as Reeve, in 1877. In closing, the town of Milton accepts nominations from the public for future street names via a form on its website. All nominations are researched by Milton Historical Society and Heritage Milton for recommendation to town planning staff. Planning staff then forward these suggested names for approval to Milton Council. With this process in place, Miltonians can be assured that a 1-hour walk through Milton will continue to be one of the best history lessons on local, provincial, and national history anywhere in Canada for generations to come. Thank you.